Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening from
Good evening.
Hi.
from BOA. Good evening to all my colleagues, friends, and teachers in Bombay Ophthalmologists Association, and welcome to another edition of I Plugged In webinars. Today, we are going to have a webinar on dry age-related macular degeneration, and we are going to see the latest perspectives and concepts in managing this particular condition. We have a galaxy of, I would say, retina superstars with us who are going to give us this perspective. And having said that, I now pass the baton on to Dr. Mayuresh to make the introductions and kick off today's webinar.
Right. So good evening. On behalf of Center of Pharmaceuticals and the Bombay Ophthalmology Association, I welcome the eminent speakers and the distinguished panelists for this webinar. I would also like to welcome the audience for this webinar on dry AMD, clinical features and management. Though they do not require any introduction, I would have the privilege to introduce our three speakers for this webinar today. Our first speaker is Dr. Paritosh Kamdar. He's a vitreoretinal surgeon and an eye specialist with more than 32 years of experience. He has received International Ophthalmology Education Award from AAO in 2008. He is the first Indian vitreoretinal surgeon to have microsurgery instrument named after him, the Kamdar Curve Vertical Micro Scissors. He is the editor and co-author of many chapters in textbooks, as well as he has many publications in national as well as international journals. He has conducted more than 70,000 retinal laser procedures and more than 1,500 complex vitreoretinal surgeries. So welcome, sir. Our second speaker is Dr. Nishikant Borse. He is a vitreoretinal surgeon with 31 years of experience, presently working as a director of Insight Eye Clinic and as a senior consultant at the LH Hiranandani Hospital. He has completed fellowship in vitreous as well as retina from Shankar Netralaya. He has got interests in retinal arterial and venous occlusions, diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema. He was awarded the Rhett Buckler Award by the American Society of Retina Specialists annual meeting in 2018. He has actively contributed to several ophthalmology publications and presented various papers at a number of international forums. He is also a member of many ophthalmic societies, as well as he is an advisor to many pharmaceutical companies. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
A third speaker is Dr. Chintan Dedia. He's a well-known consultant ophthalmologist and an vitreoretinal surgeon in Mumbai. He has research specialization in vitreoretina as well as neuro-ophthalmology. He has presented posters and papers at various national as well as state level conferences and publications across national and international index journals. He has co-authored many chapters in various textbooks. He also is a trained karate champion. So welcome, sir. I also have the privilege of introducing the panelists for today. Our first panelist is Dr. Vatsal Parekh. He is a vitreoretinal surgeon with 35 years of experience, served as a secretary of Bombay Ophthalmology Association, as well as international member of American Academy of Ophthalmologists. He served at Hinduja Hospital for 20 years as an honorary consultant eye surgeon, as well as a retina specialist. He is a co-author on various chapters, as well as he has got many publications in many index journals, also presented his work in state as well as national conferences. So welcome, sir. Our second panelist is Dr. Preetham Samant. He has 14 years of experience as a vitreoretinal specialist, currently has the prestigious post of president of BOA, also the chairman of scientific committee of MOS. He is a gold medalist ophthalmology as well as FCPS exams in 1999. He has co-authored the Fundus Fluorescent Atlas of Shankar Netralaya. He was an associate editor of the MOS journal as well as the BOA journal. He was also on the editorial board of IJO. He has got a surgical experience of more than 5,000 retinal surgeries and more than 5,000 laser procedures. Our third panelist is Dr. Haresh Asnani. He has over 25 years of experience in medical laser as well as surgical management of vitreoretinal disorders. He was the observer in vitreoretinal surgery at Beaumont Hospital, Michigan, USA, as well as Washington State University, Missouri, USA. He has presented numerous papers at state, national, as well as international conferences. He was past president of Indian Medical Association, Chembur branch for the year 2003 and 2004. I also have the privilege of introducing Dr. Swapnesh Sawant. He's a Vitreoretina Fellowship from Shankar Netralaya at Chennai. Dr. Swapnesh has been a retina consultant at JJ Hospital as well as the Haji Bachchu Ali Hospital. He has cleared various national as well as international competitive exams like PNB, FRCS, and he's currently the secretary of BOA. So welcome, sir. I would request the audience, if you have any questions, you can key in your questions in the question box, which is very near to the video window. So without any further ado, I would invite the first speaker, Dr. Paritosh Kamdar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mayuresh, for a very kind introduction. I think whenever I feel depressed, I must replay this tape because I think you said more accolades than perhaps what I deserve. But thank you very much. And heartiest congratulations to all my other colleagues, elite colleagues on the panel who also have superb achievements. It's very heartening to hear all that, and it's nice. Our mandatory declaration, I don't do cashless and I don't support it at all. Please avoid it like a plague or like COVID. Pathophysiology and clinical features of dry ARMD. So we shall examine or go through what is dry ARMD, how does it occur, what are the risk factors, are any of these modifiable to make the course less unfavorable, and can an early recognition facilitate early intervention, and can we prognosticate? Basically, this talk is a build-up for the next one by Nishikant on imaging, and then the subsequent one about treatment and prophylaxis of dry ARMD by Dr. Chintan. So age-related macular degeneration, all of us know, is a common chronic progressive degeneration of the outer retina, RPE, and choroidal complex, and it eventually results in loss of central vision, and it affects older individuals. That's the most important thing. It would result at the end either in geographic atrophy and or the wet form, that is neovascularization. Why does it occur? Superimposed over age, or rather I would say superimposed over a particular genetic background, are environmental factors, aging, certain metabolic factors, which by themselves and independently other factors triggering inflammation and aberrant immune responses, which cause changes at the cellular, extra and intracellular level, and result in cellular stress and toxicity. So aging causes visual cycle dysfunction, leading to lipofuscin accumulation, which in turn stimulates complement activation as well as oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is there because of various environmental and systemic factors also. Aging also would lead to oxidative stress, which gets compounded by choriocapillaris dropout. In addition, because of aging, there is amyloid beta accumulation and other inflammatory products accumulation, all of which eventually lead to RP cell death and overlying photoreceptor death. Drusen basically are as a result of RPE dysfunction. These are basically extrusions occurring from RPE cells whose metabolic ability has decreased. Plus, there is thickening of Bruch's membrane, so the exchange of materials with the choriocapillaris decreases. choriocapillaris itself starts dropping out, very much like capillary dropout areas occurring in vascular retinopathies, particularly diabetics. So here you have choriocapillaris dropout occurring. Now, all this gets compounded by smoking. Smoking is one of the biggest modifiable risk factor in this whole game. To the extent that sometimes if I find, or if the relatives of a patient tell me that this gentleman just can't, live without smoking, I sometimes go to the extent of even threatening that patient that if you don't give up smoking, you're certainly going to go blind. In many instances, I think the threat of blindness, it helps people to give up tobacco and smoking. So smoking by itself also, apart from its effects on the epigenome and the genes, it causes genes causes alteration of the complement pathway. Various complement factors activate the complement cascade, leading to inflammatory pro-inflammatory cytokines and a chronic inflammation. With RPE dysfunction, there is a breakdown of Brooks membrane. There is, because of ischemia, particularly because of choriocapillaris shutdown, there is, and also because of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, there is release of VEGF and other factors which cause growth of abnormal vessels, which we call choroidal neovascularization. The wet degeneration part ends up eventually in a disciform scar. That is not the subject matter of our discussion today. But progressive RPE loss and photoreceptor loss and choriocapillaris loss, it eventually leads to what is called geographic atrophy. And when this involves the Banks center, when it involves the fovea and eventually the foveola, it causes a loss of central vision. Unlike wet ARMD, this loss is relatively gradual, giving us a chance of intervention also. So for the sake of, since we are talking, our focus is primarily on can we intervene and can we prevent or at least slow down the progression of the dry form of age-related macular degeneration. We need to know certain fundamentals that one of the classifications is the Beckman Committee classification. So you have no ARMD where you have no drusen or just very tiny drusen, particularly tiny hard drusen, and there are no pigmentary abnormalities. Early AMD consists of medium drusen with or more than 5 drusen, at least one of which is more than 63 microns in size, but less than 125 micron. 125 micron, why these figures? Because 125 micron is the size of this of one of the branches, which the branch retinal veins which merge into the central retinal vein. So the size of the drusen is compared with the size of the central retinal vein diameter or the breadth as we see it. And 63 micron is the size of the macular branch retinal vein, roughly speaking. Intermediate AMD, you have at least one large drusen or more associated with pigmentary abnormalities, okay? And in the advanced form, you have geographic atrophy or you have neovascular AMD. So what do these patients typically present to us with? They'll complain of difficulty in night vision, especially with driving. Many of them give up driving. They have difficulty in reading or fluctuation in vision. That vision, clarity of the same text or the same objects is different at different times. Difficulty in making out faces, especially when they go out for social functions with differences in illumination. And sometimes they may complain even of metamorphopsia, or if we have given them an Amsler's grid for self-evaluation, they may talk of subtle changes in the Amsler's grid. Since we are talking of early detection, of course, age-related macular degeneration pathology basically leads to abnormality of the vitamin A cycle and causes abnormalities in dark adaptation. So while dark adaptometry and clinical tests would be the ideal way forward, but in real life clinical situations, it's difficult to have installed dark adaptometers and start testing for that. So a simple thing is something which we learned in our residency days, that we do a photo stress test. In a very simple, practical manner, what I tend to do is just check the vision one eye at a time, then shine the indirect ophthalmoscopy light into one eye, and see the amount of time it takes in seconds after stopping the light. I shine it for about 15 seconds and see how much time it takes to recover, say, up to one line less than what the person had read earlier prior to this photo stress from the indirect ophthalmoscopy illumination. And then I repeat it in the other eye. So this is a very practical way I found to check whether the patient's rods in particular and the RP are under stress or not. Basically, aging changes will be just tiny drusen which are less than 63 micron or no drusen at all. But when you start seeing drusen which are at least 5 in number and which are 63 microns or less than 125 micron in size, but without pigmentation, as seen in these pictures, it is early ARMD. The intermediate stage has more than 5 and which are less than 125 micron, but they also have pigmentary abnormalities and some amounts of geographic atrophy which do not involve the bank center. Okay, as is seen over here, these are intermediate size drusen. And when you have large drusen or confluence of drusen, as can be seen here, there, but without any fluid in the retina as seen either clinically or on OCT imaging, then we move on to the more advanced stage of the intermediate ARMD, dry ARMD. FAF is useful to monitor progression. So is OCT, the spectral domain OCT. Basically, one would nowadays tend to use what is called multimodal imaging, because then you have different modalities by which you are able to evaluate and be able to monitor progression. Drusen being the hallmark visible pathology, for clinical application, I would like all of us to remember certain types of drusen. So you have soft drusen, okay, which can become confluent as is seen over here. There are larger drusen, confluence of drusen as we mentioned, the larger drusen, and there are drusenoid RPE detachments, okay, which would be something larger than this when these become confluent and forms a large solid RPED without any signs of any vascularization or fluid overlying. Reticular pseudodrusen and cuticular drusen as seen over here. Basically soft, large, or nowadays they are also called pachydrusen if they are more than 250 micron in size. Confluence of drusen drusenoid, RPED, reticular and cuticular drusen. All these are basically signs that this ARMD is likely to progress to the late stages, namely geographic atrophy and the choroidal neovascularization, and or either of them or both. What are cuticular drusen? These are unlike soft drusen, which has on imaging, they have a very smooth margin. The cuticular drusen tend to be more triangular, more like apices with narrower bases. Reticular pseudodrusen are, as the name suggests, they are pseudodrusen because they are subretinal and in front of the RPE. Okay, these are hyperreflective foci which are subretinal but in front of the RPE. Pathophysiology of dry ARMD, a whole lot of proteomes are involved. I think that's beyond today's lecture. Suffices to say that some of the systemic factors like high LDL, high total cholesterol, abnormal ApoE, ApoB ratios, these can contribute, apart from smoking triggering the hyper triggering the complement cascades, and environmental factors such as pollution, whether it be air, water, food, everything. So all these are factors, plus our sedentary lifestyles where we are less and less exposed to sunlight, hence less of natural vitamin D getting formed, and an improper or junk diet which is high in fried fatty foods and less of mobility. All these help contribute to decrease in circulation, which as it is, the choriocapillaris is compromised by due to aging causing choriocapillaris loss. Further reduction in a basic circulation, the perfusion head pressure, it only helps to compound the ischemia at the level of the choroid and RPE. All this can be depicted in this diagram from an excellent paper by John Miller. So you have liposomes accumulating here, lipofuscin accumulating in the RPE cells. You have lipid and lipoprotein deposits occurring beneath the Brooks membrane and beneath the RPE, as well as beneath the Brooks membrane, and all sorts of complexes occurring along with the complement factors, eventually leading to what are called MACs, which open up the pathway and promote leakage. Breaks in the Brooks membrane allow growth of abnormal vessels, which lead to wet ARMD. But whenever these lipids accumulate, they start causing degeneration of RPE and overlying photoreceptor death. So from clinical point of view, we have certain severity scales for prognostication. We just mentioned about early and late ARMD. So the Wisconsin grading says early is just large drusen or pseudodrusen or pigmentary abnormalities, but without significant atrophy involving the fovea or neovascular AMD. These in turn constitute late ARMD. So the ARED simplified severity scale is no drusen, large drusen is 0. At least one eye, any eye with large drusen or pigment changes, you give 1 point. Large drusen and pigment changes in one eye only, or large drusen or pigment changes in both eyes, or neovascular AMD in the other eye, you give 2 points. Large drusen with pigment changes in one eye and large drusen or pigment changes in the fellow eye, you give 3. And large drusen and pigment changes in both eyes, you give 4. So if the score is 0, the risk of conversion into an advanced form of ARMD, which means geographic atrophy involving the center or wet ARMD, would be 0.5%. If the score is 1, it would be 3%. If it is 2, it would be 12%. 3 would be 25, and if it is 4, it would be 50%. So that high is the risk, and this is the reason that scientists all over to search for ways by which we can slow down the progression. So what are the modifiable risk factors? Smoking, body mass index, so exercise, good control of blood pressure, diabetes, dyslipidemia. HDL cholesterol also has been mentioned in some studies as a risk factor for progression. LDL we know would be, but even HDL has been mentioned. Though antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids, physical activity as we mentioned, sunlight exposure. And
I found this on the web.
I'm going to, anger some of our colleagues, but even cataract surgery in many studies has been a contributor to progression of ARMD. So in the future, we shall have artificial and intelligence applied to fundus pictures and various forms of imaging, where it will be able to do automated segmentation and be able to predict based on say 4 or 5 readings as to what is likely to happen to that eye over the next 2 years or so. So what do I do briefly in my patient counseling for these patients? A holistic approach. I try my best to make sure they stop smoking and or tobacco. Obesity control. I advise them to keep moving, and basically, a sattvic way of life, which a lot of our ancestors used to follow, using pure ghee in limited quantities, original, organically grown foods and grains, etc. Good, happy thoughts, meditation, lifestyle modification, and good karmas. I thank BOA and thank Centaur for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would request Dr. Nishikant Borse, sir, to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just start. Okay, am I on with the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So imaging in dry AMD, first of all, I thank BOA for giving me the opportunity to talk in this webinar. And of course, thanks to Centaur for giving me an opportunity to talk and to hold such a lovely webinar. Most of the time, people don't pay attention to dry AMD. There's a lot of concentration on wet AMD, but a lot of time, as a retinologist, we know that dry AMD lies in sort of the neglected area. And it's good to have a webinar on that. So the topic of dry AMD imaging, it can be made as complex or as simple as you want to. I'll try to make a combination of both, and you will realize as we go into the details why it is as simple and as complicated too. So why do we need imaging? First of all, for diagnosis, I really doubt whether any retina person needs imaging for diagnosis, but it is most important for us to document the progression, to prognosticate the AMD, and of course to pick up early wet AMD that can also arise as the age-related degeneration progresses. Now, basically, what we are trying to see are only 3 things. One is the macular drusen, which we can pick up only when they are medium or large in size. Early drusen are rarely seen on clinical examination. Pigmentary abnormalities, whether there is a hyperpigmentation or hyperpigmentation, and geographic atrophy. I think imaging is basically based on these 3 findings, and these 3 findings are seen differently in different imaging modalities, which help us to prognosticate and to document the progression. Now, what are the imaging modalities we have? The fundus photography should never be forgotten. However, complex imaging modalities do come in. fundus fluorescent angiography, our old modality. Most importantly is for fundus autofluorescence and OCT. And Octa, of course, has got a limited role in dry AMD, and wherever it is very useful to pick up early CNVM if it is arising. Now let's go to our color photography itself. If you go to color photography, there are too many things we can pick up when you take a fundus photograph vis-a-vis when you examine it on a 78D. Remember, the patient cannot focus at one point for a very long time for you to pick up each and every detail of a dry AMD. So I personally would like to take a color photograph for any patient who comes to me with a dry AMD. And when you take a photograph, you can pick up a lot of changes like early pigmentary change here, the parafoveal drusen that are there, the multiple drusens that are temporal to the fovea. You can see a ring of drusen which are close to the fovea. We can see the pigmentary changes that are there, and even the confluent drusen, the geographic atrophy, which is parafoveal, and another geographic atrophy if you see here. Now, most of these signs can be picked up on color photography when we take a good photograph. And I would always recommend color photography is the first step in imaging of dry AMD. The color photography, of course, like how Paritosh mentioned, we also helps us to give the stages to the dry AMD. That whether it's an early AMD, an intermediate AMD, or a late AMD, which Paritosh has elaborated on, can be based purely on color fundus photography. Also, it helps us to assess the score. Like if you give a 1 point for each risk factor that is present, that is either one or more large drusen or presence of pigmentary changes. So one eye can have 2 points, both ears together you can have 4 points. And when you have a risk factor score of 4 points, you can say that in 5 years risk of progression is 45% and 10-year risk of progression is 71%. Whereas when the score is 0, the 5-year risk is only 0.5 and the 10-year risk is 1.5. So progression and the prognostication can also be done just on color fundus photography. Fluorescent angiograph itself is basically important only when the patient complains of sudden worsening of vision or when there is associated metamorphosia. And basically it is done for us to rule out CNVM. Performing FFA on a routine basis, I don't think it is necessary. However, if you do an FFA, it will help us just to elaborate the changes that are already there. We know that the drusen do get stained by the fluorescent, and you can pick up hyperfluorescence of the drusen when we are doing an FFA. We can pick up a window defect that is due to the geographical atrophy. We can also pick up confluent drusen. We can also pick up early atrophy that is coming in on FFA. We can also pick up pigmentary changes, which can be seen here, like a hot cross bun sign, which comes in around the fovea. And it helps us to pick up RPEDs, which are there around here, which of course, as the fluorescent time goes by, they don't leak because there is just a stasis of J and there is no leakage. But if you really think, with the advent of OCT coming in, is FFA necessary for us to pick up all these changes? I really don't think so. And that's why, like I said, a routine FFA may not be necessary in case of a dry AMD. So we can have a good color fundus photograph, but many a times these systems are, classification system is not very easy to apply immediately for the patient. We really need to study the fundus photograph and get back to the patient on that. There can be a variability in fundus pigmentation and drusen appearance depending upon your flashlight, depending upon the cataract and other media opacities that come in. We don't get a depth of resolution of the retina and the choroid on fundus photography. And that's why we don't get a detailed quantitative examination. And because of this, we need to go ahead for further imaging modalities, which are the multimodal imaging that we have. But even with all these limitations, remember that the color fundus photography is widely used, and it is the continued application of color fundus photography in future studies is necessary for comparisons with the earlier studies. So don't forget our old friend, the color fundus photograph. Now let's go to something we call as multimodal imaging. When you go to multimodal imaging, there is of course a fundus autofluorescence that has come to the fore nowadays. and OCT, and these two have emerged as the main adjuncts in monitoring the non-neovascular AMD. OCD-A, like I said before, is to pick up the early CNVMs, and in research side of dry AMD, they have the near infrared reflectance, the near infrared autofluorescence, the multicolor confocal scanning laser ophthalmoscopy, which give you the complementary and confirmatory information. However, the last one is rarely used in clinical practice. Now, this is what I meant by a multimodal imaging. You can see there is a color fundus photograph, which is showing a large area of geographic atrophy, which can be very clearly seen on fundus autofluorescence. So you can pick up the geographic atrophy very nicely on fundus autofluorescence. This is color fundus autofluorescence, not of the same patient, of another patient. This is a confocal, multicolor imaging, which makes the areas of geographical atrophy very easy to be seen. Down here, we have the ANFAS OCT, which shows you very clearly the area of the geographic atrophy, which also can be seen on an OCT. Let's have a look into a few of them, because getting into the depth of each of the modalities will take up more than an hour. Now let's go to our trusted friend, the OCT, which is now widely available. Now, many times we do a cross-sectional OCT, but remember in dry AMD, it is the NFAS analysis which will help you see the real extent of the atrophy and even the drusen. And that will help you analyze the retina, the RP, and the choroid more when we use this adjunct. And remember, OCT itself is a fantastic adjunct to find out about the dry AMD. It is widely available now, and it is quite important in clinical practice for us. What it helps us to pick up? It helps us to pick up the drusens, which Paritosh has rightly pointed out. These are the hallmark of dry AMD. So you can see soft drusen can be seen as an elevation of the RPE. Modulation of RPE, many times you get changes in the RPE with accumulation of membranes, which are in the Brooks membrane, which can be seen on an OCT. And of course, you can see hard drusen, which are small pinpoint-like elevations. Now, like Paritosh said, if these deposits are subretinal rather than under the RP, if they are above the RP, then it becomes the reticular drusen, which have a higher rate of progression. Now, the drusen can collect, and it can be seen as hyperreflective or hyperreflective in certain areas of lesion, depending upon the composition of different drusen, depending upon how much of amorphous material is there in drusen, and therefore you can get hyper and hypo, both types inside the drusen itself. The Brooks membrane, remember, is very visible here because the drusen is basically collected between the RP and the Brooks membrane. So you end up seeing the Brooks membrane very nicely when you're visualizing the drusen. And the drusen will push up the RPE, causing the RPE to appear irregular. It can become thinner and it can get disrupted. When a lot of these drusen come together, we get something called as the drusenite pigment epithelial detachment. And the drusenite pigment epithelial detachment has a high rate of progression either to geographical atrophy or a CNVM. And therefore, when we have a drusenite PED, which you can pick up on an OCT, it's imperative that we follow up this patient more closely. Also, we can see the IZ and the EZ line very clearly on the OCT. The IZ line is the interdigital line, which is at the level of the RPE joining to the photoreceptors, whereas we know the ellipsoid zone is the junction at the photoreceptor area, and these two junctions also can get elevated with the RPE. And over a period of time, these junctions can get totally disrupted as the condition progresses, and then disruption of this zone corresponds to the loss of visual acuity. We can also see how the drusens can luckily regress in many times if you're lucky and if your treatment is working. In the particularly RPE segmentation, if you do, you can see there was a lot of drusen in this patient before, and now over a period of time the drusens have disappeared and you can just see few of them. There are some lucky patients this way too. Now coming to geographical atrophy, which is the late stage of AMD, here the peculiar thing is you will not see any drusen at all. because most of the drusen have gone and the end stage has come in, where there is total atrophy of the retinal cells. There is a loss of RPE, and the choriocapillaries can be seen very much out here. The external band of Brooks membrane choriocapillaries increases the reflectivity, like what you can see here. And we can see the choriocapillaries more clearly because the retina on top of that has got atrophied. Now, like I said before, the geographical atrophy can be very nicely seen if you do an NFAS OCT, which shows you the real extent of the geographical atrophy, and it can help you also see the choroidal capillaries which are underneath it, especially if you are using a Octa. What are the other changes that you can pick up on OCT? We can pick up end stage changes like retinal RP cell migration that occurs into the retina in the later stages. You can see pseudocysts, which are nothing but atrophied areas of the photoreceptors, which leave void areas, which are pseudocysts, and retinal outer tubulations, which are non-specific changes, which are basically Mueller cells, which have sort of gone around the dying cells. And these are non-specific to anything. It can be also seen in the last stages of wet AMD. They can be seen in advanced dry AMD and many other retinal conditions, which also can be picked up on OCT. Now, what is the disadvantage of OCT? It's limited scan field, and it depends upon the image quality, and it has got an imperfect automated image segmentation whenever you like to do it automated many a times. And also, it is very difficult to track progression of it. However, like I said, with the spectral domain OCT coming in more and more, we might be able to have a greater penetration into the choroid. We'll get more details. It will cover a wider area, and therefore it might help us to track the progression in the future. Having said that, there is something which the multimodal imaging has helped us to classify in the present era, which is the classification of atrophy meeting, which is the international meeting of retina experts, which proposed how to classify based on OCT, the geographical atrophy. Now, this is basically based on the observation that the photoreceptor atrophy can occur without RP atrophy. Like if you have reticular pseudodrusen, you can just have an atrophy only of the retina, but not of the RPE. But when there is an RP atrophy, there is always associated thinning or loss of outer retina. And that's why the CAM has gone and said there are 4 terms: C-RORA, that is complete RP and outer retinal atrophy; I-RORA, that is complete incomplete RP and outer retinal atrophy; complete outer retinal atrophy, that is CORA; and I-RORA is a incomplete outer retinal atrophy. Now this slide is with a big disclaimer, only for research, and do not ask me to elaborate because I have not been able to go ahead and see so much of details on the OCT, and it will really taking a painstaking time for us to go through each and every patient of ours. But this is just to keep you updated with the latest classification. Coming to the fundus autofluorescence, it is the gold standard for geographic atrophy. Now we know the autofluorescence is by lipofuscin, which is there in the RP cells, and the atrophic lesions can occur as an area of decreased autofluorescence. There is a contrast between the RP cell loss and the adjacent area of the intact RP, and that helps us to find out the areas of geographic atrophy very clear in fundus autofluorescence. Now, whether you can pick up drusen is a subject matter, because many a times smaller drusens or medium-sized drusens don't give out so many changes on fundus autofluorescence. Only when the drusens are fairly large, you can get certain changes on fundus autofluorescence, and therefore FAF is mainly used for geographic atrophy. Now, what are the devices which we have? We can have a special fundus camera which has got an attachment for fundus autofluorescence, which is basically for redshifted. The advantage is that we can even use it for fundus angiography, for FFA, color imaging, and everything. But to get a real clarity, we have something called as a confocal scanning laser ophthalmoscope, which gives you a very clear image, which you can see here. So the first image is from a fundus camera, which is redshifted, which gives you autofluorescence like this. But if you look at a scanning laser ophthalmoscopy confocal, the image of autofluorescence coming in, it's just too good. And also the white fold will give you the full area of autofluorescence. But I personally feel this particular imaging is more important than A and C. Now, it's very important for us to have a follow-up and to know how it is progressing. We can see here, this is a patient with geographic atrophy involving the fovea. And after nearly 2 months, you can see it is progressed just a bit. This is an area of multiple areas or multifocal geographic atrophy, which has progressed quite a bit after 22 months. And this is a patient having early geographic atrophy. You can track how the progression has occurred at 16 months. So fundus autofluorescence helps you to track geographic atrophy fantastically well, as in this case, which is you can see the progression over 1 year. So geographic atrophy is basically also has one more tool. So at the junction of the atrophy and the normal areas, you have hyperfluorescence. And the hyperfluorescence is basically from the RP cells, which are dysfunctional and semi-functional, which are sort of clumped next to the area of atrophy. And these cells are in variable stages of going to atrophy or hypertrophy, and they sort of give you a hyper autofluorescence because they have more lipofuscin in them. Now, based on how much hyper autofluorescence is there at the junction of the hypo and the hyper, that is at the edge of the geographical atrophy, they have classified it into further types, which we will see in the next slide. They can be classified as none, like there is an area of geographical atrophy, but there is no area of hyperfluorescence that is seen here, or focal, where you see focal hyperfluorescence, which is around this area, or you can just have a full band around it, which is called as a banded, or you can have it patchy. When it is diffuse, you can get different appearances, like if it's like a mesh, it is a reticular, or it can be branching, it can be fine granular, it can be like a trickle, which is a trickling, or we can get a generalized punctate-like thing. But in this particular classification or group, they have found that the diffuse type has got a more chance of progression. So it is more important to prognosticate when you see a diffuse type. And in the diffuse type, if you see a trickling type of fundus autofluorescence, it has got a more chance of progression. And the banded. So if you do a fundus autofluorescence and you want to see the hyperfluorescent areas around it, if you see a band of hyperfluorescent all around it, these patients will progress with geographic atrophy more. Or if you have a diffuse type of hyperfluorescence, especially this trickling type, then you know they are going to progress. So the algorithm becomes something like, is there an increased fundus autofluorescence at the junctional zone? If it is no, then it goes into none. If there are increased FF directly to the margin of the general geographic atrophy, then it can become focal, banded, or patchy. And if it is at the margin and even elsewhere, we classify it as diffuse. Then you see the pattern and you know that whether this is going to progress more or not. And now we know that it is the banded type and the diffuse type, which might have more chance of progressing with geographic atrophy as compared to others. There are other markers too. The lesion size, obviously smaller lesion size will have a lesser progression rate. So a smaller lesion size will progress lesser as compared to this. Whether the lesion involves with unifocal or multifocal lesions. Okay, so multifocal lesions have a greater chance of progression as compared to unifocal. Lesion location. If there is an extrafoveal geographic atrophy, it might progress faster than a foveal lesion. And extent, the size of it. The larger is the size, the more is the chances of the extent of fundus hyperfluorescence which is around it. If there is a large area, then it's going to progress more. So a fundus autofluorescence is a very, very important tool for us to know how the lesion is progressing. It helps us to track the progress, and it also helps us to prognosticate the progress. And that's why this is the importance of multimodal imaging today. So you can see these are the different modes. The color fundus photograph showing the geographic atrophy, the fundus autofluorescence, which shows the geographic atrophy much easier, along with areas of a band like hyperfluorescence around it. We can see how there is an early fluorescein angiogram. That's why it is not recommended in usual cases for routine. The NFAS OCT, it gives you as good a picture as a fundus of autofluorescence. So you can still use an NFAS OCT image to track geographical atrophy if you don't have access to fundus autofluorescence. Of course, I cannot elaborate the more importance of OCT, and near infrared, we really don't have available most of the times. So in summary, the precise quantification of geographic atrophy and its progression by fundus autofluorescence and imaging helps us to have a detailed morphological study of the retina, and also the standard OCT helps us to study it furthermore, which shows us how the abnormalities are progressing. And it is essential for us to use these modalities to prognosticate and find out any interventional strategies that might benefit in the future whenever the treatment, which is for dry AMD, might come in. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request Dr. Chintan Dedia to start with the talk.
Good evening, one and all. At the outset, I would like to thank Team BOA and Center Pharmaceuticals for this opportunity. Are my slides visible?
No.
Oh, I have already shared. 1 second.
There's sometimes a little time lag. Yeah, now it's coming.
No. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you Team BOA and Center Pharmaceuticals for this opportunity. So I'll be initially touching upon the two landmark studies, AREDS and AREDS 2, and then elaborating more on antioxidants in dry AMD. I don't have any financial disclosures for this talk. So in spite of this pandemic of webinars going on since the last 2 months, there are so many delegates and the participants. So I respect the spirit and thank you for that. So as we all grossly know that treatment of AMD, the dry AMD is treated with antioxidants, and the wet AMD, the anti-VEGF injections form the mainstay of treatment. And just to complete the list, I have added laser therapy and photodynamic therapy, but they are more or less now obsolete. So as one ages, the production of free radical increases, and that causes progressive damage of cellular structures. And antioxidants help to prevent this damage by neutralizing the free radicals. So variety of dietary sources have these antioxidants, like the nuts, the dark green leafy vegetables, dark colored fruits and vegetables, the seafood, the egg yolk, and etc. So each of these antioxidants has a different role. Some of them form an important part of the structure, whereas some of them absorb the harmful blue light. So basically most of them act as free radical scavengers and thus prevent against the oxidative stress. So many observational studies have explored the association between the nutrient intake and the progression of the risk of AMD. This is one study which was published in IGO, conducted in South India, where they found that higher intake of carotenoids was associated with a lower risk of AMD. This was one more study published in seminars where the nutrients were found useful in preventing the progression of AMD. So coming to the AREDS study, age-related eye disease study, which was the first landmark trial, and it was a large-scale study to study the risk factors, clinical features, prognosis, and progression of two age-related diseases. One was cataract, and another one was AMD. So today I'll be focusing only on the AMD part of it. So the aim of this study was to evaluate the effect of high doses of zinc and other antioxidants on the development of advanced AMD in elderly. It was a multicentric study where 4757 patients were randomized, but only 3640 were enrolled, and the study went over for a period of around 6.5 years. So this study gave this clinical classification where the category 1 was no AMD, which means normal aging changes where less than 5 small drusen are present. Category 2, which is the early AMD, where multiple small drusens or few intermediate sized drusens or pigmentary changes are present. Category 3, which is the intermediate AMD, is characterized by extensive intermediate drusen or at least one large drusen or geographic atrophy not involving the fovea. And category 4, which is the advanced AMD, includes either the geographic atrophy involving the fovea or any neovascular AMD. So the subjects had to take an antioxidant dose of vitamin C 500 milligram daily vitamin E 400 international units, beta carotene 15 milligrams, which was equivalent to 25,000 international units of vitamin A, zinc 80 milligrams as zinc oxide, and copper 2 milligrams as cupric oxide. This was the daily dose for every subject. So they were divided into 4 groups, where group 1 received only the zinc, group 2 received only the antioxidants, vitamins, group 3 received both, and the group 4 was placebo group, which received only the sugar pills. So copper was added to AREDS formulation containing zinc to prevent copper deficiency anemia, which is associated with high zinc intake. So to judge success of a study, it is important to see that some of the patients getting worse. So in the category, the AMD categories 1 and 2, very few of the patients had a worse outcome. So it was very difficult to determine whether these subjects really benefited from this supplementation. So for analysis purposes, AMD categories 1 and 3 were excluded, and only categories 3 and 4 were taken into consideration. So it was found that in these categories, the risk of the subjects taking antioxidants and zinc, the risk of progression to advanced stages at 5 years was 20% compared to 28% in the placebo group, and this was statistically significant. So this AREDS study concluded that those with intermediate or advanced AMD or vision loss due to AMD in one eye and without contraindications should consider taking a supplement of antioxidants plus zinc, such as that used in the study. And the advantage of this study was that with limited treatment options available at that time and no prophylaxis available, the findings from this study led to formulation containing antioxidants and zinc for the management of AMD. But there were some shortcomings in this study. So it was well known that beta carotene is known to cause lung cancer in smokers or even in the former smokers in the past 1 year, and thus increase the mortality. Also, the zinc dose which was used in this AREDS formulation was 80 milligrams, and zinc is known to cause gastrointestinal problems. And also, the maximum dose of zinc which can be absorbed from the GI is 25 milligrams, which was found in one study. So, to overcome these two shortcomings, there was a need for a AREDS 2 study. So before going to the actual study, there were a few observational studies which found a link between higher consumption of lutein, zeaxanthin, and omega-3 fatty acids and decreased risk of developing AMD. The reason these molecules were not included in the first study was at that time the lutein and zeaxanthin were not commercially available, and also beta carotene was commercially available, and at the same time it was being tested for heart diseases and cancer, and was recommended by multiple pharmaceutical companies. So before going to the study, let's know what these molecules are. So lutein and zeaxanthin form an integral part of the yellow macular pigment, and this absorbs the harmful UV and the blue light, and thus protects against the photooxidizing effect of the blue light. Antioxidants protect against the oxidative stress, and omega-3 fatty acids help to maintain the membrane fluidity. So amongst the omega-3 fatty acids, the docosahexaenoic acid is a major structural component of retina, and the eicosapentaenoic acid, referred to as EPA, is used in DHA synthesis. These omega-3 fatty acids are anti-angiogenic, they are neuroprotective, they are anti-inflammatory, and also they are anti-apoptotic. So the major modification in these AREDS 2 was that the subjects received 2 milligram of lutein, 10 milligram of lutein and 2 milligram of zeaxanthin. At the same time, they received 350 milligram of DHA, which is docosahexaenoic acid, and 650 milligram of EPA. So thus this study, the objective was to assess effect of alternative combination of these vitamins and minerals on the progression of AMD. It was a multi-center randomized double mask placebo controlled trial which went over a period of 5 years, where 4203 patients with either bilateral rajdusin or rajdusin in one eye and advanced AMD in the fellow eye were included. So there was a primary randomization done where one group received only lutein and zeaxanthin, the other group received the omega-3 fatty acids, the third group received the both, and the fourth group, which was the control, received the original AREDS formulation. So this was not a true placebo or a true control group. And because beta carotene is known to cause lung carcinoma in smokers, there was a secondary randomization done where the one formulation was only AREDS, the other group received AREDS minus the beta carotene, the third group received the AREDS with a low dose of zinc of 25 milligram of zinc, and the fourth group received AREDS minus beta carotene with a low dose, that is 25 milligram of zinc. So the outcomes of AREDS 2 study showed that daily supplementation with lutein and zeaxanthin plus or minus omega-3 fatty acids, in addition to the original AREDS formulation, showed no statistically significant effect on progression to advanced AMD or changes in visual acuity. Also, at the same time, lowering the zinc dose to 25 milligrams from 80 milligrams and eliminating beta carotene had no statistically significant effect on progression. So this study concluded that addition of lutein, zeaxanthin, and the omega-3 fatty acids to the original AREDS formulation did not reduce further risk of progression to advanced AMD, and because of the potential increased incidence of lung cancer in former smokers or even in current smokers, lutein zeaxanthin could be an appropriate carotenoid substitute in the AREDS formulation. So apart from the AREDS and AREDS2, there were other landmark trials showing the importance of lutein, zeaxanthin, and omega-3 fatty acids, both for the dry AMD and the wet AMD. As far as the dry AMD trials are concerned, I'll be just giving the summary. The Blue Mountain Eye study showed that a weekly serving of fish decreased the risk of early AMD. The lutein antioxidant supplementation trial showed that visual function was improved with lutein as well as zeaxanthin. The Leutica study concluded that a supplementation with this lutein, zeaxanthin, and omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants should be considered in patients of non-exudative AMD, and the Tozal study concluded the same. As far as wet AMD trials are concerned, the NAT2 and the Illinois study showed that increase in the levels of the omega-3 fatty acids in the serum reduce the risk of wet AMD, as well as the omega-3 supplementation with anti-VEGF treatment is associated with decreased vitreal levels of VEGF-A in wet AMD patients. There are many other trials in different phases going on involving molecules like zinc monocysteine complexes, Neurotex NT501, which is an intravitreal implant releasing ciliary neurotrophic factor, and also involving formulation of fenretinide. So let's highlight some facts and clear some myths that diet alone cannot provide the same level of antioxidants and zinc as the AREDS formulation. And also the level of antioxidants and zinc in the AREDS formulation are considerably higher than the amounts in any daily multivitamin. So they are not a substitute for any multivitamin. And there is no known treatment to prevent or delay development of AMD. So before we take the positive points, let's know the side effects of each. Like beta carotene is known to cause yellowish discoloration of skin. Also, it has been proven to increase risk of lung cancer and thus the mortality. Vitamin C is reported to cause kidney stones. Vitamin E is known to cause fatigue and muscle weakness and increase in mortality on different meta-analysis, and also reported to cause hemorrhagic strokes. And zinc is well known to cause copper deficiency anemia, increased UTI, increased genitourinary and gastrointestinal problems, and decrease the HDL levels. And the omega-3 fatty acids can cause loose stools, discomfort, and belching. This is apart from the general side effects which are present with of the formulation. So there are some contraindications also, like high amount of oxalate stones in urine, or iron metabolism disorders causing increased iron storage, or gallbladder disease, or Wilson's disease, which is the copper storage disorder, or anemia from sickle cell disease, or pyruvate kinase or G6PD deficiency, or increased risk of bleeding due to any clotting disorder, or low vitamin A. So these are contraindications for the formulations. So the latest AO recommendations, which came in 2019, suggested that those patients with early AMD, which is the category 2, can be observed, and they should be warned of the symptoms of conversion to CNV by giving a home Amsler, and also called for regular follow-ups, and we should document them using fundus photos and OCTs. And those with intermediate AMD and advanced AMD in one eye should receive the antioxidant supplementation as per the AREDS2, and they also should be warned of the symptoms of conversion and called for regular follow-ups. And those with bilateral advanced AMD can be observed and referred to the low vision clinic. So there are still so many questions which are left unanswered, that because the individuals which were studied in AREDS2 were very well nourished and they had above the recommended intake of dietary nutrients. Also, the AREDS2 did not rule out a possible benefit for those with early AMD or those who are at risk of developing the disease. And in the Indian scenario, the average Indian diet is largely deficient in micronutrients and omega-3 fatty acids and other multivitamins. So there was a study which was published recently in Ophthalmology in the year 2019, which showed that Mediterranean diet reduced the risk for AMD by 41% for those who consume the diet vis-a-vis those who didn't consume. So what is this Mediterranean diet? So it involves high consumption of plant-based foods like vegetables, fruits, legumes, unrefined grains, cereals, nuts, with the olive oil, which is full of unsaturated fatty acids, and fish, and lowering the consumption of meat and the dietary products. So in this study, it was found that none of the individual components of this diet on their own lowered the risk of AMD, whereas the entire dietary pattern, the entire combination provided the protection against the advanced stages of AMD. And there can be swaps which can be done in the diet, like honey can be used instead of sugar, and herbs and spices can be used instead of salt. And it's very important to avoid saturated and trans fat, and also processed, fried, and the other fast foods. So my take home message would be that a supplementation with AREDS2 formulation should be considered for high risk Indian patients to prevent progression of AMD. It's very important to adopt a multifaceted approach involving a healthy lifestyle along with a healthy balanced diet rich in antioxidants and micronutrients, so that we can tackle this emerging public health problem of AMD. Thank you for your patient listening, and if there are any questions.
Right. So it was indeed a good presentation by all the three speakers. Now I would like to invite questions. So over to you, Preetham sir. For question.
So you are muted.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
we
can.
Yes,
can.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Preetham sir, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you
Yes,
very
yes.
well.
I think we've in the three presentation we've covered a lot of aspects of dry AMD. It was really comprehensive and at the same time to the point. Let me start backwards because I'm fresh with what I heard Chintan say. Now, Chintan, like if there are, we obviously we know the advantages, effects of supplements and, the AREDS2 formula. So at what age would you start these formulations?
Yeah, thank you for that. So if the patient has risk factors like a positive family history or advanced AMD in one eye, or even if he has an intermediate AMD in the eye, so irrespective of it's for age-related macular degeneration. So any elderly patient who has these risk factors needs to take the AREDS supplements like daily dose with food, and we can continue them for 3 months or so, give them a drug holiday of 1 month, and they should keep continuing them.
So when we say elderly patient, I would like to ask everybody on the panel, at what age would they start patient on these supplements? Will it be 50, 55, 60? At what age?
Probably more than 60. I mean.
Okay.
So, Preetham, I'll go with the family history.
Uh-huh.
So if the patient has a family history of a sibling or anyone already having a dry AMD, I might start the patient earlier, even before the clinical signs do come in. And like Dr. Vatsal Parekh said, that the earliest sign, or if the patient is more than 55, 60, we can also advise that. But definitely, if there's a family history, I would like to start it much earlier.
Yeah, Preetham, if I would like to say something, there is a definite genetic predisposition here. And if we are able to determine that somebody in the family or the patient's siblings have suffered from AMD, it would be better to start no matter what the age is. If you remember, some time back, there was a study and some work being done on the genetic, the makeup of these patients, where they used to do some kind of testing of the CFH and ARMS2 genetic, alleles to find out if there's any polymorphism there. And they could actually, predict which patients have a high risk for developing AMD in the next 5 years or 10 years. And such patients were recommended antioxidants, zinc, and AREDS2 supplements. So I think there is a place for that there. So I think as soon as we come to know the risk factors, we should start them, no matter what the age.
There is a polymorphism Y402H for complement factor H, which is associated with AMD.
Yep, it is.
Okay, I have a question for you, Nishi. You really wonderfully laid out all the imaging techniques and how to go about imaging dry AMD. Now, when you see a patient of AMD, now you've seen all the characteristics, the signs. So, how often would you want to image the patient? What is your protocol? How often you call the patient back and image the patient to see for progression?
So what I do is when a patient comes in, I definitely do a color fundus photography and an OCT for us to know what are the changes happening at what level. If I see a geographic atrophy, I would send them for a fundus autofluorescence, definitely for imaging. And every time the patient visits, when you call him after 3 months or 6 months, I repeat that to see whether it is progressing or not, for us to help us to prognosticate the progression.
Okay. And now since we are on this topic of looking at progression, how many of us still believe in the past we used to, maybe even now we give home Amsler charts and grids. Are we really still following that?
Yes.
I still follow that, especially if you see areas of geographic atrophy close to the fovea, and if you see a lot of confluent drusen which are around the fovea, then these are the patients who have at a higher risk of developing a CNVM, and
Right.
they would definitely need a Amsler chart. Yes.
Okay. Dr. Parituj, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, no, I do any ARMD, I give them an Amsler's to monitor because that it's going to help me to pick up either of the two lesions at an early stage. So I do give them Amsler's test. One more thing which I also nowadays recommend is to have a blue diode light coating over their spectacle frames for whatever it is worth, because we are now in a digital world. A lot of these LEDs, particularly the blue light emitting ones, they can be deleterious for the macula. So that's another thing which I recommend. We were talking about supplementation recommendation. So even if there's a strong genetic history, until I start seeing large drusen or confluent drusen, I don't tend to start these supplements. But I do tell all the siblings of a patient to go on to a high antioxidant diet. Basically plenty of green leafy vegetables, colored fruits and vegetables, and almonds, walnuts, things like that. So dark raisins, etc. So these are things which I do recommend. And of course, using goggles whenever they have to go out into bright sunlight, things like that.
Dr. Vatsal Parekh, sir, your comments on how to follow up these patients. What is your protocol? How often?
I think a simple message to all ophthalmologists should be to have a Amsler chart to be given, because it's a very non-invasive way, though it may be little late to pick it up, but still it is a useful way to monitor at home. Probably I would call patient every 6 months or a year, or if he notices drop in vision, and especially I tell patient to close one eye and see, because many times this point is not told and patient usually sees with both eyes at home. Another important thing I feel is, though it's a very less common, but any patient with geographic atrophy, though he has complaint of blurring of vision always, but any sudden drop we should look for follow-up and probably look for CNV, because though usually we believe geographic atrophy may not have CNV, but maybe 1% or 2% of patient of geographic atrophy may develop CNV and may be treatable, with anti-VEGF.
In fact,
they do.
One of the early signs of wet AMD is you can see the drusens actually absorbing. The drusens tend to get absorbed when the wet AMD starts. So one has to look for that also. We have a question here on the chat. Dr. Mitali from Mumbai is asking that if a patient has AMD in one eye, so I'm guessing she means dry AMD. If a patient has signs of AMD in one eye, what is the chance of getting it in the other eye, and what are the factors? Probably what are the biomarkers in that one affected one eye? Do we have any opinions on that?
If the eye has got a geographical atrophy, it's very rare that the other eye will not have. So, it's very difficult to have dry AMD only in one eye and not progressing in the other eye. It's extremely difficult. So you might see perifoveal drusen in one eye and drusen which are away in, I mean, you can get different scenarios, but it's very rare or next to impossible to have a sort of a moderate to severe AMD in one eye, which is totally absent in the other eye. So
Right.
it's,
Uh, uh, to answer that question, I think, may I just share the screen and show a couple of slides, please?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead, sir. In the meantime, while you're sharing the screen, then let me ask one more question. When we know that dry AMD is a precursor of wet AMD. So, maybe Dr. Nishi or anyone can answer this. When you're imaging a dry AMD, we know that PCV can be a precursor of CNVM because of PCV. Polypoidal also happens to be a large, PCV happens to be a large cohort of these AMD patients. So are you also looking, when you're doing imaging in dry AMD, are you also looking at, looking at if there are polyps or whether the patient fits into the polypoidal subset?
uh, frankly, PCV and dry AMD as a combo, I have really not seen in many. Because by the time the dry AMD sets in, the PCV itself is so aggressive and active that it's already started doing the damage. Whereas the dry AMD is like a very slow progressive disorder, and PCV is of course a much more aggressive disorder. So by the time the dry AMD changes come in, I think PCV is already taken over.
Vikram sir, can I add?
Can I say I?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
Yeah. So when we are imaging AMD on OCT, we see PEDs, and if we happen to see a flat irregular PED, those are known to be associated more with PCV. So if we see FIPED, that is flat irregular PEDs, and extending in size, then at the edge of the FIPED, you would actually look for development of polyps in future. Above the FIPED, you would look for the presence or absence of subretinal fluid. And below the FIPED, you would keep looking for increase in the choriocapillary layer more than 125 microns. So that is where the connection between the AMD and the PCV starts.
And in fact, basically here, like wherever you find thickening and sclerosis of the choroid, so which means it's part of pachychoroid disease
Pachychoroid.
spectrum, and you find these irregular large PEDs. So that is where then, and if fluid is present, of course, then you strongly suspect a PCV over there. And the best way then is to start also, add OCTA probably, so that you can discover any branching vascular networks, etc., and would be able to treat it accordingly. I was just trying to show this, the Penrose triangle, so which indicates that genetic and other environmental and other susceptibilities causing pathological processes which superimpose early and then subsequently intermediate ARMD, which then tends to progress to one out of the two, but usually it is not just one of the two. Both can be present at the same time. You can have atrophy with neovascularization in the same eye. Sometimes atrophy may be the predominant form, and at a late stage, neovascularization might occur. I've seen eyes like that also. So this is one. And the second thing, to answer Dr. Mitali's question, the modified AREDS severity scale is what would roughly give you an idea of the risk in the other eye. So that is what you need to refer to. So if the score is 4, then the risk is about 50% that the other eye is going to develop the wet form or the geographic form or the advanced form of ARM.
There is Dr. Chunilal from Rajkot, and he's asking the role of vitamin B12 in management of dry AMD. Any thoughts on that, vitamin B12?
A lot of these ARMD patients, especially in us who are Asian Indians, they have hyperhomocystinemia. So in these patients, hyperhomocystinemia somehow predisposes to venous side thrombosis more than the arterial side. So sluggishness of blood flow, which would theoretically, with an already attenuated choriocapillaris, this will reduce the perfusion pressure head and cause further ischemia in the choroid, which can cause acceleration. So if homocysteine is high in us Indians, ideally we should be looking for, I think it's called the MTFHR, I forget the name of the gene. We need to look for that mutation, and if that mutant is absent, and this is a primary hyperhomocystinemia without the mutation that is, so then we need to give them supplements, but the cost of that is high. So sometimes it's cheaper to give B12 and pyridoxine and folic acid supplements to the patient till the homocysteine becomes normal. I mean, I tend to follow that in practical circumstances.
There is one question from Dr. Sagar from Chennai, and he's asking, how do you differentiate a geographic atrophy from probably a disciform scar?
I mean, in a disciform scar, you can easily see the scar, the fibrotic tissue, which is present. So when you do an OCT through it, you will be able to see the scar itself, number one. And when you do, you really don't need anything more. Even a clinical examination, you will see the scar out there. The scar might have a surrounding geographical atrophy. So, you can do a fundus autofluorescence, which will show you a surrounding geographical atrophy. But when you're doing a OCT through that, you can easily pick up a scar. There should be no problem. A clinical examination, a good clinical examination, and a simple OCT will help you differentiate.
Ritam, usually when you have a cicatricial stage, you will have some fluid or hemorrhage also clinically when you examine,
Yes.
and you may not need OCT.
Correct.
Yeah. So a good clinical examination, and if you really want, you can do an OCT, more than enough for us to differentiate.
And I think the subretinal gliosis will be obvious.
Very obvious.
I sometimes I personally have a problem in high myopes. In high myopes sometimes, and who are showing signs of early AMD, even though the imaging becomes tough. Your fundus autofluorescence is sometimes confusing because they have so much of already like myopic macular
Absolutely.
degeneration. So any thoughts on that? How to differentiate in these myopes, or how to deal with that?
I would go by symptoms.
I think angiography here would be very useful. It will definitely posterior pole choroidal atrophy in myopes.
Aresh, you'll have to say that again.
I
because
repeat that again. I said an angiography will definitely help us differentiate between a posterior polar myopic atrophy versus a geographic atrophy in a AMD, in a dry AMD.
Nishi, I believe you have an Octa, right? You have an Octa.
No, Deepak has it, so it's next building, so I don't need to buy one.
Because I'm curious to know how much really Octa has changed, our approach to dry AMD. whether it has added value to our understanding or following up dry AMD or prognosticating its conversion.
I'll tell you, it has definitely helped. First, of course, you can pick up any vascularization that is there. You can study the choriocapillaries, and also that might give you further information about how the disease is progressing. Third, most of these Octa machines, they have a more superior software for segmentation, and that will help us to know more about how the RP is there, and at the level of the Brooks membrane, and how much amount of your photoreceptor atrophy is there. So these machines are definitely having a better imaging than your standard SD-OCT. So there's a better imaging. You can make out the choriocapillaries, the depth is better. So it will help you better in imaging with these imaging machines, definitely.
Preetham, the SSOCT, swept source OCT as against the SD-OCT, which has a greater depth and a better imaging of the choroid. So that is able to bring out more of the choriocapillaries, and progressively, if one is able to do it, if the patient can afford it and agrees to it, then over a period of time, one would be able to make out some of the choriocapillaries attenuation, etc., and be able to guide them that yes, indeed it is worsening or whatever, But that's all more of theoretical rather than of practical importance.
Zeiss has come out with this Angioplex OCT, Angioplex Elite, which is swept source.
Yes.
I think it is too good to believe it.
Yes.
What depth you see, choriocapillaries and other things. It's just fantastic, probably. So that will change. And coming back to your question on myopic, Preetham, I have given patients, anti-VEGF injection when high myop complaints of distorted vision and OCT. You may see some hyperreflective spots in front of RP. I have not done many angiographies because, and some of these patients do benefit with anti-VEGF treatment. So maybe it's difficult to pick up, but I would probably err on side of giving anti-VEGF to a myope who complains of distorted vision, more so if he has little hemorrhage or something,
Yeah, but it is said that in myopes, it is very difficult to pick up a CNM early on a OCT, whereas an angio definitely picks it up. And that's why we really need to do an FA. So if you remember to the talk by Dr. Francisco in our VRSI on myopic CNVM, this was the basic point that he had drawn.
Correct.
Swapnesh has a point.
Yeah, one of the Octa diagnosis is a term quiescent CNVM. So that term of quiescent CNVM has been brought out as a term during the Octa era, where you have non-exudative CNVMs. So you see a membrane, but there is no fluid, no activity which is seen. So that is one of the newer additions to the whole terminology. The other thing is when you have SHREM, which is a collection of various materials. It can be fibrinous, it can be neovascular, it can be hemorrhagic, it can be so it's just a OCT term where you have some kind of a membrane and where the RP is split. So whether to follow these patients up and prognosticate the patients, Octa helps. If you image a SHREM on Octa, and if it is vascular, then more likely that the patient is going to have repeated attacks and the prognosis is much poor. Whereas on Octa, if the SHREM shows avascularity, then probably the disease has died down. So though Octa has a role, it largely depends on the structural OCT within the Octa for the interpretation. That is what Borse sir was mentioning, that it still depends on the structural OCT and the planes which are used for interpretation of that Octa.
Yes.
Okay.
Very
may I just, for 2 questions before somebody had asked about the difference between a disciform scar and atrophy. So I just was able to get some images. So may I share the screen and show it?
Oh yes, yes. And while you're sharing the screen, I'm going to just put the next question so all of us can think on it. I sometimes, from my anterior segment colleague, I get these patients referred, for fundus evaluation, and they show signs of dry AMD, few drusen. And then the typical question that my friend, who calls me up and asks that, okay, now I'm going to do cataract. This patient has dry AMD. Should I put a multifocal IOL or not? Or should I put a monofocal? So I want your views on that. So just think about it well before, after we see these slides, we could discuss that. Yeah, Dr. Paritosh.
So the slide to the left, you see this dense hyper-reflective material under the fovea, no fluid in or under the neurosensory retina. And here you can see this dirty grayish but well-defined, with well-defined borders, this tissue. And you can see all these soft drusen here. So this is an inactive disciform scar which has got formed.
Right.
Whereas here in this eye, you can see these soft drusen becoming confluent under the fovea. There's no fluid, and there is hypertransmission of the light. So, and thinning out and atrophy of the RPE and photoreceptors here. So this is an area of geographic atrophy, which is even better seen on this fundus autofluorescence image. So I hope that answers the question.
Paritosh sir.
Absolute bang on. Paritosh, absolute bang on.
Just go on to that same image.
Sorry, you want it again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Just put that image again.
Yeah.
So where you showed the transmission defects.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. If the size of those transmission defects is more than 250 microns,
yes,
that is what Borse sir was saying. That is probably a C-RORA.
Right.
And when there are no transmission defects and the size is smaller than 250 microns, that is the I-RORA. And you can also see very nicely depicted that there is dipping of the ONL and the IPL layers just above the scar.
Yes.
Yes.
So that is also termed as a nascent geographic atrophy. So that happens much before all this changes start. And in fact, geographic atrophy is a subset of C-RORA, where they say that C-RORA encompasses the geographic atrophy along with the adjacent CNVM plus or minus, and the geographic atrophy is a subset of C-RORA, all the features but no CNVM.
Okay. Very nice.
Lovely.
Very
Very
nice.
nice.
Swapnesh. Thank you for reading out that paper so thoroughly and explaining to us.
Very nice.
Yeah, you made it easy for us.
Yes. May I stop sharing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any thoughts on multifocal or monofocals in
So,
cataract in AMD?
My clear diktat is if there is a retinal abnormality involving the macula, no multifocal. Simple.
Yeah, this is a full topic for another discussion, I think. But as Nishikant said, we have to inform the surgeon that there is a retinal pathology. Now, beyond that, sometimes it's up to them whether they want to insist on putting a multifocal. But I think we've just got to inform them of the risks.
Yep.
Here, I think becomes a very moral and ethical question that are we more responsible towards the patient who's in front of us or to the person who refers the patient?
As I said, no, this is going to be a long debate.
Yep. We can extend it by 2 hours.
Go beyond dinner time then.
To be honest, I have stated it very explicitly to patients. I have, suffered in terms of references or something in that once I tell them that, no, this is not a good idea to put in a multifocal, obviously, that colleague is never ever going to refer further, patients with potential.
That's what I said, Paritosh. Don't say no, just give them the information. Let them
I asked this
interpret.
question, what is a webinar without some controversial topic? So I had to ask.
The patient who's come to you for an opinion, no?
That's why I asked the question. I'm not answering it.
But I think Vatsal Bhai will be very good at
Yeah.
this because he has got a
Great.
wonderful way of putting everything. So Vatsal Bhai, what is
We
your
want to hear Vatsal now.
No, Preetham, I was just going to share one thing that a very good friend of mine, I will not give you the name, he has put few multifocals in patients with macular degeneration also. And he believes, and I have reason to believe him, that some of his patients are happy. Can you hear me?
yes, yes.
Yeah, some of his patients are happy because what he thinks is that if patient can understand the idea of multifocality, that he would not need glasses, so his contrast would be less and his vision may be little less. He says some of his patients are really happy having understood the thing. So probably what I feel is that it's important for patient to understand. The other question I always have is not drusen and cataract, but say patient has geographic atrophy and nuclear sclerosis. Now, this patient, whether to operate for cataract or not to operate for cataract, is a difficult question to answer because how much vision loss is because of geographic atrophy and how much nuclear sclerosis is that responsible. And I think, as Paritosh said, probably cataract may precipitate some amount of macular degeneration also. So that is also another difficult question I find to answer. Probably what Lingam Gopal and those people used to say is to have a potential acuity measure of PAM and then check visual acuity and operate, you know.
Yeah, PAM is pretty accurate in this condition.
But do we get a PAM now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
From Hine you get, it's about 50,000 rupees.
It's an interesting thing to have there.
we are still using it.
Yeah. Okay.
We finished most of the questions on the chat.
Great.
Other points that we would like to discuss? Most of
I
the-
just wanted Chintan to highlight before we call off this meeting or end this meeting. Chintan, there are certain don'ts also while you prescribe the antioxidants and supplements. Like, you know, you will avoid zinc in smokers. So do you have a list of when not to prescribe?
So apart from the contraindications which I mentioned, like more than zinc, beta, in any beta carotene is avoided, and anyways, this beta carotene is not included in any formulation nowadays. But apart from the cautions of, so those are the main contraindications. Like those, if you are taking zinc also to maximize the absorption, you have to give a 1 hour gap either before or after food. Or if the patient has any metabolic disorder or any storage disorder of iron or copper or gallbladder diseases, and those patients is better to avoid the formulation.
Okay.
Hyperoxaluria is because of the risk of kidney stone, right? Because of
Yes, yeah.
Very nice.
So anemia due to these sickling disorders or basically storage disorders and metabolic disorders.
Yeah,
Very
it is-
important because
yes.
many a times these medicines are prescribed as placebo to every patient who comes in the clinic. So it's important to rule out, not use them as a placebo medicine.
Yes.
I think this is a very important take-home message that you can't just blindly prescribe antioxidants. It is very important to look at the contraindications, like Dr. Nishi suggested. So I think we've covered most of the aspects of dry MD.
The
So
last
I
question,
would
Preetham.
request.
Last question.
Sorry.
Last question, Preetham.
Yes.
Where's the party tonight?
At your own home.
At your own home.
Virtual.
Lot
No.
of vegetables. You can put in one
Yeah.
a little bit of juice of carrot, probably.
Olive oil.
Mediterranean diet.
Yes.
Olive oil. And you'll look younger in the next webinar,
Absolutely. See, Vatsal Bhai has put it rightly. I would like Dr. Mayuresh to probably make some closing remarks, and then finally, Dr. Swapnesh, you can give the vote of thanks.
Right. So thank you all the speakers as well as the panelists. It was a nice discussion as well as the presentation which we have had. I would like to thank Centaur Pharmaceuticals and their brand Ocubless, which is India's only formulation with arid spoon formula. With this, I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Swapnesh Sawant for the vote of thanks. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, our presenters, Dr. Chintan and Dr. Nishi sir, for and Dr. Paritosh sir for a comprehensive covering the topic of dry AMD. It was a very fruitful discussion with our moderators also, Preetham sir, Vatsal sir, and Asnani sir. And thanks once again, Centaur, for supporting this initiative. I would like to thank personally Mr. A.K. Handa, who is the president of Centaur, Dr. Mayuresh Kiran, who is the Vice President of Medical Services in Centaur, Mr. Sarshi Tripathi, who is a Sales Manager, and Vitali for coordinating this event. And on behalf of BOA, I really thank all the attendees who have also contributed their bit. With this, I announce the session to be concluded.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you
Thank
everyone.
you.
very
Thank
much.
you very
Thank
much,
Thanks a lot.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.